Hi, everyone. I'm Bree White, Digital Engagement Coordinator with the REC Foundation.
And I'm Bobby Mitchell, Event Engagement Manager with the REC Foundation.
Welcome to the 2023-2024 season update. The season is off to an exciting start. Teams have already proven they have what it takes to make it to VEX Worlds, and we can't wait to see you all there.
We've got a lot to cover today, from signature events to overall changes and rule updates from Dan Mance and Grant Cox.
But first, let's take a look back at last season. What an incredible season. It's hard to believe that Over Under and Full Volume were revealed only a few months ago. I can't wait to see the amazing designs you've come up with.
Now, let's hear from Dan and Grant as they dive into this season's update.
Thank you, Bobby and Bree. Hello, my name is Dan Mance. I'm the CEO of the Robotics Education and Competition Foundation. I'm here with my good friend Grant Cox. Today I have the opportunity to give you some season updates for the 23-24 season, and after I'm done, Grant is going to give us some game updates. So a lot of information to share with you. I'm pretty sure you'll learn something, and as always, if you have questions, please go to recf.org or go to the RECF library and search for your question, and there's probably information that's already released. Before I start talking about changes for 2024, I want to give a little bit of history. So when we moved to Dallas for the 2022 season, we made some changes. And what we did is we actually broke the competition into 4 parts. So we had VRC High School, VRC Middle School, along with VEX-U and JRTC. Then we had IQ Middle School and IQ Elementary. And why did we do that? Well, first of all, we wanted to give more teams an opportunity to compete at VEX Worlds, but we also wanted to keep pricing down. Coming out of the global pandemic, prices skyrocketed. And honestly, it's a lot easier to keep prices, lower when you're spreading the costs over 3,200 teams, right? So we made that change. But we always get feedback after VEX Worlds every year. We do those surveys and we do listen to your responses. And one of the biggest feedback we got from the teams, from coaches, from volunteers, and from the VEX and REC Foundation staff is those overlap days were really, really hard, right, Grant?
Including me. I gave him this feedback a lot.
Yeah, I heard it from a lot of you all, right? So in order to have 4 competitions, crammed into 10 days, we had those overlap days. So when one competition was ending, another one was starting. And what that did is it really strained our resources. There wasn't enough hotel nights of rooms on those nights. There's long lines for food, and it was honestly just packed inside the arena. So we took a step back, like we encourage our students to do as part of the design engineering process. We're like, what is the root cause? What can we do to fix this problem? And what we're doing for VEX Worlds in 2024 is we're going to 3 separate competitions instead of 4. This will eliminate the overlap days. So we are going to start with VRC High School on April 25th through 27th. Then we'll do VRC Middle School, VEX-U, and the JRTC National Championship on April 28th through 30th. And then we'll finish with VEX-IQ Middle School and Elementary School May 1st through May 3rd. That's right, we're combining the IQ programs just like we used to in Louisville. So we'll have 3 distinct programs. There won't be any overlap days. And that should hopefully address the concerns that we received from the parents, the coaches, our volunteers, and the Grant Coxes of the world, right? So as part of this process of reducing the number of teams, because we're actually going to reduce the teams by about 760 with this change, as we still have to pay for this event. So unfortunately, with these 800 less teams and the continuing increase in costs for food and travel, and bringing our volunteers in and hotel nights, unfortunately, we are going to have to increase the cost for VEX World's registration fee to $1,800. So we understand that anytime there's a cost increase, it's difficult, but it's something we truly have to do. At the EP Summit, someone said, Dan, why didn't you do incremental changes? So last year, why didn't you raise it a couple $100 and next year raise it a couple $100? Well, we really wanted to try to keep the program affordable because we really thought we should have raised it to $1,400 in 2023, but we didn't want to do that. But at the end of the year, we look at all the revenue from VEX Worlds and all the expenses, and unfortunately, we weren't able to cover all our costs. Now, I know there's some people out there that think the VEX Worlds is a profit center for the REC Foundation. That's actually not the case. We actually price VEX Worlds and use our sponsorship revenue to try to break even. That's all we're trying to do. So for 2024 VEX Worlds, we are going up to $1,800. I really do hope the community understands why. You'll still have a great event, and in theory, you'll have a better event because we won't have those overlap days, right? So another change for VEX Worlds in 2024 is the world skills list. So if you'll remember back in 2019, we got rid of the world skills list, and we had valid reasons of doing it. We had a lot of people setting up optimal fields. We had people doing 20 skills runs just to try to get that score to qualify for VEX Worlds. Well, we eliminated that and we pushed the skills down to the state and regional levels, right? So skills were still important. That's how you got to your state events. That's how you got to your regional events. But we heard a lot of feedback from the community, especially from our friends overseas. Here's a shout out to you, Singapore, saying that's one of the things they loved about the REC Foundation VEX Robotics competition, is that if you were in a small region that only had a couple spots, you could still qualify for VEX Worlds through skills. So because of the feedback we got from the community, we added the world skills standings back to VEX Worlds last year. Well, we're making a tweak for the 2024 season for VEX Worlds. We're still going to have the skills list for high school, VRC middle school, and VEX-U, but we're not going to have it for the IQ programs. And there's 2 reasons why. So first of all, I just announced that we're going to have fewer spots for IQ, right? Instead of 800 for each program, it'll be roughly 420. But also, almost all the teams globally that had IQ, high skill scores in IQ, already qualified for VEX Worlds. So this is a great opportunity for VRC high school and middle school, but it's something we're discontinuing for IQ. So,
and to be clear, Dan, are these changes you're talking about for the VEX Worlds that's coming up in like 6 months, or the one that's for the 24-25 season, 18 months from now?
This is for the VEX Worlds in 24, so the 23-24 season. Thanks, Grant.
Yeah.
I have one other announcement about VEX Worlds. It seems everybody wants to know where is VEX Worlds in 2025, and we've actually answered this question a few times, but VEX Worlds will still be in Dallas for 2025. So it's not a secret. We are looking at new locations for 2026 and beyond, including international locations. But for 2025, this will be our 4th year in the city of Dallas. Now, I will actually give advanced dates because there's something unique this year. So VEX Worlds 2025 will be May 6th through May 14th. So that's Tuesday, May 6th through Wednesday, May 14th. And many of you know we try to have VEX Worlds in April, or in worst case, late April into early May. And the reason we do that is because we're aware that in May there's IB testing, EP testing, home proms, etc. But the way it works trying to find locations that can host an event of this size is you can't always get the arenas when you need them. So for 2025, that was the dates that were available to us. Now you'll notice I haven't said the order of VEX Worlds for 2025 because we're working very closely with the teams, understanding IB testing dates, understanding the AP tests, and we'll work together to pick the optimum dates for our high school students so it has the least amount of impact as possible on their testing. On September 27th, Google celebrated their 25th anniversary. It's hard to believe that Google has been around for 25 years.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So Google has been supporting REC Foundation programs for the last 6 years. Many of you are familiar with our Girl Powered initiative, and Google is actually the presenting sponsor of Girl Powered. Not only do they host an incredible workshop in California every summer, they host workshops across the country, indeed across the world, to have more girls become involved in robotics. Google is also the sponsor of our mentor program. Our mentor program allows coaches for new teams to get the support they need to be successful in their first or second year. So Google has always supported us. Well, as part of their 25th anniversary, Google.org made a huge announcement that they were going to provide $10 million in funding to introduce robotics and other technologies to over 300,000 students. That's right, Google has given $10 million to the REC Foundations and other programs to start middle school robotics teams. And also, as part of this grant, we will be introducing artificial intelligence to our programs. So a big shout out to Google.org for giving that funding to the REC Foundation and other organizations. And again, a huge thank you to Google for all the support that you've provided over the years. I have been with the REC Foundation now for almost 7 years. And during that time, we have never had a registration deadline. Matter of fact, it always kind of cracks me up that teams will still be registering for the season the week before VEX Worlds. There's reasons for that. You know, schedules in international are sometimes different than the US. Teams in smaller states, maybe they don't really get going until January or February, but we've always allowed registration right up to VEX Worlds. Well, at the REC Foundation, we're committed to make sure that every team can attend at least 2 and preferably 3 events. And over the last 2 years, we've seen a trend where teams that are registering late are very frustrated because there's no events for them to register for. And, we want happy teams. We want the teams to be able to compete and have a good experience. So over the past summer, we got together as a group and we're like, what can we do to address this issue? And so the first time ever, we are actually going to have a team registration deadline. And that date will be December 15th. Again, the purpose of this is if you register by December 15th, we can assure you that your team will have at least 2 events that they can compete in. It's just something we can't do with a later date, right? So we think everybody in the community knows about this. Matter of fact, we've seen a huge spike in registrations in September and October. We're well ahead of where we usually are. And frankly, only about 3% of teams registered after January 1st anyway. So we expect the impact to be small, but we do want to make sure for you teams out there that are used to registering in January and February, you will need to get your registration done by December 15th. One of the areas of growth in our program has been the huge popularity of signature events. I mean, what started out 5 years ago as 1 or 2 events has now become one of the highlights for many of the students to go to. Are you a fan of signature events, Grant?
Absolutely. I didn't know there was so many this year, but I had the chance to go to Mall of America both last year and this year. It's a great early season opportunity to see how the game is played. I always want to make it to more, so if anybody wants to see me at your signature event, leave a comment below.
Yeah, Grant says that he didn't realize there's so many. Do you realize we're having 32 signature events this year? 32 signature events. That's incredible. I myself am planning to go to the Indy signature event and as well as the Sugar Rush event in Hershey in mid-December. So excited about that. Because of the popularity of signature events, we realized that we needed to make some changes. We have more event partners that are asking to host events. And in the old days, we kind of did the summer to choose locations and work with event partners. But on November 1st, we actually opened up the process for the 24-25 season signature events. So hopefully you've received an email or you've seen the notice on our RECF library. But if not, and you are interested in hosting a signature event, please contact your event engagement manager, or again, go to the REC library and get information about the process. Again, the idea is that we'll get all the applications now. We'll be able to meet with you, determine where we want to host signature events so that we have this all wrapped up so we can make the announcement before VEX Worlds. Part of our program isn't just competing with the physical robot. As everybody watching this today knows, the judging process is essential to what we do at the REC Foundation. I really like the changes our CJC has made over the last couple years with the remote judging, improved rubrics, improved procedures. And this year, we're even making more changes to improve the process. So when I'm traveling, one of the questions everybody asks me is, what are you going to do about clone bots? You know, it's probably the number one question I'm asked now.
So Dan, what are you going to do about clone bots?
Well, clone bots, inherently, there's nothing wrong, and I think you'll talk about that a little bit. But we do want to reward teams that have originality and innovation as part of their program. So last year, when everybody was talking about clone bots, one of the things we wanted to do is get input from the community. And I'm going to give a shout out right now to the Student Advisory Board. I was in a meeting with them and we were talking about this problem. And I said, hey, why don't we make the Innovate Award be a qualifying event for VEX Worlds, and we'll move down the Design Award. And the Student Advisory Board said, Dan, that's a dumb decision. What you really need to do is add innovation as part of your Design Award. And you know what? The Student Advisory Board was right. So for this year, we've updated the Engineering Notebook rubric to incentivize teams to show evidence of, originality and innovation as part of their design process. So you will get the most point value if you have evidence of independent inquiry from the beginning stages of the design process through the building of the robot, right? That doesn't mean if you've taken your inspiration from another design that you're disqualified. That's not it at all. We're just rewarding those teams that can demonstrate and include creativity and originality from the beginning. As part of that, we're also changed the Innovative Award to actually really focus on originality and that innovation, as the word is. So for that award, we're actually asking you to demonstrate in your notebook the origins of your thoughts, right? So, identify the sections in your notebook where you talk about the brainstorming and how you came up with that concept, that design element, that strategy, that attribute that makes your robot unique. So, again, inherently, I worked for Fanuc Robotics for 20 years. A lot of 6-axis robots look the same. We've always had the evolution of design in our programs. It's natural, but we really do want students getting the most out of the experience of brainstorming and designing their robot. So for those students that are putting in that effort, you are going to have a better chance to earn the Design Award and the Innovate Award. So, we have some other changes this year. There's a lot of changes, and I always encourage everybody to go to the judging handbook and make sure that you're familiar with the changes. But there's one change I really thought was important to communicate to the entire community today, and that's the criteria for Excellence Award. So a few years ago, back in 2018, we made a change that to win the Excellence Award, you had to be in the top 30% for your qualifying matches, right? That was to make sure that a team didn't win Excellence Award that didn't have a moving robot. And we also had criteria of where you ranked for your skills runs as well. Well, this year we've tweaked it a little bit. So you still have to be in the top 30% at the conclusion of your qualifying matches. So that's really not any change. You also need to be in the top 30% at the conclusion of the robot skills runs. So that's your overall skills score, your driving skills, and your autonomous skills, right? What's new this year is you must also be ranked in the top 30% of your autonomous coding challenge. So that's new this year, right? So when Robot Skills is over, to qualify for excellence, you need to have be in the top 30% with a score above 0. So if you go to an event and only one team does skills, so you're technically in the top 30%, but your score is 0, you're not eligible for the Excellence Award. So the reason we changed this criteria this year is we wanted to make sure that all our teams are participating in the autonomous skills, right? Part of our program isn't just about building the robot and doing the design notebook and doing driving skills. Programming is a key part of what we do. So by adding this requirement for the Excellence Award, the idea is to encourage more teams to do the programming. We've had teams that have won Excellence Award because they just absolutely crush it with the driving skills. They have a super high score, so they're in the top 30%, and they don't even put a robot down for the autonomous skills. And that's not the spirit of what we're trying to do. So that's one of the changes we're making. A lot of people say, well, what happens if no teams actually meet these criteria? Remember, people don't like to hear this, but remember, it's not required to give an Excellence Award out at an event. Now, we really hope teams win the Excellence Award, but there's nothing in our manual that says you must give out an Excellence Award. And I have a feeling that maybe at some early season events, we may not give out an Excellence Award. And there might be some people that don't like that decision, but I really think that when that happens, I think teams will really focus on working on their autonomous programming. Well, how many of you out there like to do online challenges? I mean, our program is more than just drones and robots, right? One of the things that we have is this online challenges where we reward teams that have great CAD, or they do great photography, or they write essays or make great videos. Online challenges has been part of our program since the inception, and I think it's one of the things that really makes the REC Foundation unique. Well, in October, we opened up this season's online challenges. So if you have not seen that, please go to our webpage. But you'll see some changes this year. So as we do every year, we assess what online challenges our students are participating in. And every year we have a couple online challenges where the participation has dropped to 20 or 30 teams. So we have eliminated those online challenges for this year. It's not something new. We've done this in the past. But just make sure, if you're thinking you're going to do XXX online challenge, make sure it's still available. The other thing we did is our girl-powered online challenge sponsored by Google, and we made some changes to that too. So we're in year 7 of this online challenge, and we've noticed that the essays are kind of getting repetitive. So still some great submittals out there, but we wanted to spice things up a little bit, right? So this year for the girl-powered online challenge, instead of an essay, you're now going to submit a video. So we're really excited to see what teams can do, what creativity they can bring into it, while still, trying to explain why girl power is important to them. And finally, probably the biggest change to online challenges this year is that we have combined middle school. So in the past, we had VRC High School Online Challenge, VRC Middle School, IQ Middle School, and IQ Elementary. But when you think about it, the students that are competing in IQ Middle School or VRC Middle School are of the same age. So it really made sense to merge the middle schools together. So you'll still be submitting your online challenge with students of your age, but instead of 4 awards for some of the online challenges, it'll be now 3. So I think that's a common sense change that makes sense. So you'll have high school, middle school, and elementary. So again, I myself judge online challenges.
Me too, actually.
Yeah.
I love doing it.
Yeah, my family all does. It's neat. I get to get my daughters, and I think last year my wife judged 200 online challenges. So please submit them. We love to see your submissions. Well, I have one more thing before I hand it over to you, Grant.
Just one?
Just one. So
is it a big one?
It's a big one.
Okay.
The Robotics Education and Competition Foundation is more than just VEX Robotics. Even though at these town halls, a lot of our media, we focus on the VEX Robotics program, and we're really, really proud of that program. I mean, we've grown from a few hundred teams to be the largest robotics competition in the world now. But not all students do mobile robotics, right? And we realized a couple years ago that we needed another path for those students. So in 2019, we had our first season of drones, and 3 years ago, we launched the aerial drones competition. It's growing. We have over 2,000 teams that we expect to compete in aerial drones competition. And much like VEX, we have a new mission every year. So in September, we launched the 23-24 season mission. It's called Eclipse. And it's, I think, our best game ever. Kudos to the drones team, the GDC from the drones team. So there are 4 missions as part of this year's game. You can go to the REC Foundation website, recf.org, roboticseducation.org, or you can go to the REC Foundation library and you can watch the game release video, the mission release video. You can download the manual, and you can get the qualifying criteria. And also, many of our sponsors are super excited about our drones program, and we have drone grants this year. So again, go to the RECF library, look about our program, and if you're interested in starting a drones program, fill out the interest form for a drones grant. If you are competing in drones and you want to see what this year's mission is, if you haven't already, again, and if you're a VEX team and you're just curious about the drones program, again, go look at the game unveil video and go look at the game manual. So we're super excited about this program. Another change that we're making for our drones competition this year is last year we had 4 regional championships. So they were spread across the country, and our regional championship includes both the middle school and the high school teams. Well, one of the changes we're making for this year is we're going to have 5 regional championships because the program is growing so quickly. We needed to break it up into 5 regions, but we're also giving the drones middle school teams their own championships. So 5 events and 1 additional middle school event for this season. So the dates and locations of these events, again, are on the RECF library or the Robotics Education website. So excited and wish all the students a lot of luck this season. We'll probably have more updates, whether we do it as a town hall or we just send out email notifications. But we always appreciate your questions, and I'm looking forward to later in the show reading some of your questions and providing some answers. But with that, we've talked a lot about some of the changes to the program for this year, but I know many of you students are actually tuned in to talk to Grant and understand some of the game manual changes. So Grant, turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dan. A lot of really cool information in there. I know people are definitely really excited about a lot of those changes and announcements. A lot of questions that have been asked a lot of times. So excited to hear about all that from you. It was really cool to hear you talk about the clone bot situation and the changes to the design award and the innovate award and so forth. That's also a question that we get on the GDC pretty often, is this okay? What are you doing to stop this? Et cetera, et cetera. I've mentioned this a couple times, but I figured this is a good platform to tell everybody at the same time. We actually don't necessarily mind the robots that are heavily inspired by other robots quite as much as some people might think we do. There's been this really cool trend, especially in the VEX IQ competition in the past couple of years, where those teams and those individuals who post their videos online or their images online of those robot designs, other teams will pick them up and learn from those designs and tweak them and change them and make them their own. And so that's something that kind of took, I think, a lot of us by surprise. Is if you go actually look at and talk to some of the teams who have robots that you might at first glance think are clone bot type robots, they can actually tell you a lot more about the robot than you would expect. And all the clone bot robots will have a number of subtle differences to them. So I'm actually all for the concept of teams sharing ideas with each other and collaborating. That's something that happens in real engineering. Engineering doesn't happen in a vacuum. Nobody invents a 4-bar all on their own, right? So so that's one kind of side ramble that I wanted to make. I just want to talk about some of the key rules updates that have come out recently. Hopefully everybody knows by this point, there was a game manual update on October 3rd. Typically the mid-season updates, we try not to include too many totally game-changing changes, and this one ended up including some. So we definitely pay attention to a lot of the early season events and feedback from head referees at those early season events, early signature events and whatnot, and kind of make tweaks accordingly. So if you haven't seen that October 3rd update by this point, definitely go check it out. The first thing that I want to talk about that was kind of modified in that update is the possession rules. So for the first time, I think, in at least as long as I've been involved with the GDC, we have actually significantly changed the possession rule and added a definition for plowing in addition to possession. So the big question with regards to possession is, hey, so you have this definition that refers to concave faces versus flat faces. Well, what is control? What is moving with intent, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a really good Q&A out there that I'd encourage everybody to look at, but I'll give you a bit of the summary right now. The easiest way to explain it, if this is the front face of your robot and like you're moving in this direction, a perfectly flat robot it is almost impossible for a perfectly flat face of the robot to be possessing multiple triballs. This will almost always be guaranteed to be plowing. Plowing multiple triballs, totally fine. If the front face of your robot is very clearly concave, or it has like a U shape, or rollers, or any of those types of things, that is very clearly concave, very clearly going to be considered possession. And if you get multiple triballs up in here, that would be considered a violation of that rule. The real question comes in the scenarios like this, where let's say it's a face of the robot that is pretty flat, but maybe they had some damage during the match and it got like a little bent, or they've got wings that pop out and one of the wings like didn't extend all the way. This type of robot now falls in a very explicit gray area between possession and plowing that is intentionally supposed to be there. That gray area exists so that head referees can kind of make a judgment call based on the intent of the robot, or the intent of the drivers in the robot, the context of the match, context of the design, etc. Most teams seem to be following this rule pretty clearly. They have wings that flap out. It's pretty clear that they're flat or even convex. These teams are abiding by the spirit and intent of the rule, and a very minor moment is unlikely to be considered a major violation. It'll definitely be a warning. You'll definitely get called for it, but if you fix it, you'll be fine. If your wings flap out and you have like a hard stop and you're very clearly trying to like circumvent this rule, or just very edge case get at it, the head referee is going to call you on it, and you might get a warning for the first time, but it'll escalate after that with repeated warnings. The big picture answer for possession is like, try not to overthink it. If the robot is controlling the triball very visibly, it's definitely possessing it. If it's plowing a bunch of them, it's not possessing it. And if it's in the gray area, just don't overthink it. Just play the game. It'll be fine. The one last comment I want to talk about is G1 and G2. We're going to talk about student-centered robots today. So hopefully some of you have seen there have been a lot of things published lately, and a lot more focus on this concept of student-centered designs, student-centered programming, student-centered award presentations, all that fun stuff. And there's which is a good thing, but one side effect of it is now people are again overthinking in some cases, or thinking an appropriate amount, trying to figure out where that line is drawn. Is this robot designed and built and programmed by students? Well, what if those students learned their programming from an online resource? What if those students used a library that they found online? What if those students used a robot design that they got inspiration from on YouTube? These are valid questions, and they have, like, to kind of what Dan was saying earlier, these are questions that we've been tossing around for years and years and years. And the state of the code of conduct process and the student-centered policy process now reflects the outcome of those conversations over the past few years, where we started to realize that those are not necessarily the questions or the issues that these rules are really intended to get at. I'm talking about stuff you guys probably would not even believe if I told you. I'm talking about teams who show up at Worlds, #1 programming skills in the entire world, and the students can't tell you how to connect the robot to the computer, right? Or teams who show up to Worlds, their Auton win point hits every single time, 100%, and if you ask them to make it turn left instead of right, they don't know how to do that. Right? Those are examples of teams that have violated our student-centered policy, most likely. And they're those are the teams that these processes and these rules are intended to weed out. If you are the type of team who you're trying to wonder, if you use a PID loop on your robot and you're trying to decide like, hey, is it student-centered if they use the P value, but as soon as they get to the I value, the student can't figure out how they don't know calculus. Like you're already so far into the weed, like you're already so far within our intent of student-centered. that you shouldn't even be worried about it. Hopefully that makes sense. And the reason I wanted to bring this up particularly is because the RECF has done a really good job this season of releasing some new processes and documents in the RECF library that I think some of the people who are asking these questions haven't read. So hopefully the editors will put a link to that article right here. I didn't tell them I was going to do that. Hopefully they'll put a link to it. I highly encourage everybody to go check it out and read it because it'll actually detail out, hey, what happens if you suspect a team is having G1 or G2 issues? Hey, is it on the judge to investigate this? Is it on the head ref to investigate this? How do you approach this? I'm not going to go through all the steps right now, but definitely go check that out next time you have any concerns about that subject. So that's a bit of a mini rant on that. So those were the main things I wanted to talk about today. I know there are a couple questions coming up a little bit later with some other topics that people wanted to hear, but in general, I've been stoked to see how this season has been rolling out. I know when this game came out, a lot of people were like, hey, this isn't quite as flashy of a game as disc shooting or any of that other stuff. But if you had a chance to play this game or, started working on your skills runs and everything, I think this game is more than meets the eye, and it's probably one of my favorites we've had in a couple years. So that's all I've got. I think now it's time to head back to Bree and Bobby for some more updates.
Thanks, guys. I'm loving the games this year. Coming up, we've got some fun questions submitted by the VEX community that we hope Dan and Grant could answer.
But before that, let's take a look at the season's social roundup.
Hey, I'm Ryan. We're part of the Grandbots K team, and what I love about today is meeting new people and getting to enjoy the world of robotics.
Hi, my name is Hamza.
My name is Majid.
And we're from Team 4779F.
And one thing we got better at in this competition is coding.
And also designing the robot.
Hi, my name is Nabil, and what I most enjoyed about today was actually seeing all of these various teams from different schools and actually forming bonds with them and preparing for the matches.
Hi, my name is Raman Mahfouz from Grandbots 8, and a skill that I've learnt from this competition is definitely teamwork.
If you want to appear in our next social roundup, be sure to tag us in your posts and use the hashtag #OnTheWayToWorlds.
Signature events are coming up, and we are so excited. But team spots are filling up fast.
Some events are already full, so get those registrations in.
There are tons of events for teams to check out, including familiar events like Wave at WPI and the Kalahari Classic.
And even some brand new events like Fun in the Sun and Rumble in the Rockies.
Just make sure you register soon. You do not want to miss out on these incredible SIG events. To learn more about signature events near you, head to recf.org for more information.
Now let's throw it back to Grant and Dan as they answer your questions from the VEX community.
Well, Grant, our team submitted some more questions for us.
Excellent.
But I think this time they are all for you. So
I gotta go.
well, I'll tell you what. How about if I just read the questions to you and you answer them? So
Let's do it.
All right. So the first question is from Alex in Colorado. So Alex asks, we have a question about the use of the VEX GPS sensors in this year's competition. So I understand that the sensor relies on a QR strip around the field to figure out its position. I noticed last year that there wasn't any QR strip around the field. So I'm wondering if the GPS sensor isn't allowed in competitions or if we have to request that the QR strips be put on.
Okay, yeah, that's a totally fair question. So you are correct. The GPS sensor relies on the strip around the field with the QR looking code on it. It is totally allowed. It's not like it's not allowed or anything. However, we don't require that event partners put it on the field for standard VRC events, middle school or high school. There are a few cases where the code strip is required. VEX-U is one of them. VEX-U requires the code strip. Autonomous coding skills matches, so whatever field your event is using for autonomous coding skills matches needs to have the strip. And then T22, the rule T22 in general covers the overarching mentality that fields at an event must be consistent with each other. So the most common scenario when event partners are using the code strip is if they have upgraded to the new portable field perimeter. And so if you only have like one portable field perimeter and like two of the old metal field perimeters, then they can't use, like, they can't have one field without the strip and one field with the strip, right? So right now we're still in kind of the transition period where most EPs are upgrading to that portable field perimeter. Eventually, will the code strip be required on all fields? Maybe, probably at some point, but that's not going to be for a while until we're confident enough that enough event partners, aren't using the old metal field perimeter anymore. As for the question at the end of the question about do you have to request that the strips be put on, that's definitely something you can email your event partner about in advance of the event. Say, hey, we use the code strip during Auton in our normal head-to-head matches. Are you going to have it on your fields? But it is at the event partner's discretion. They don't have to put it on if they don't have them or don't want to. So the answer to your question is like yes and no and maybe and a few different answers. So hopefully that helped.
Yeah, and Grant, I would add that I hope more of our teams are using the GPS strip as part of their autonomous.
Absolutely,
because
yeah.
if the more teams that are using it for their autonomous skills challenge this year shows an increased interest, and that'll get us to make that requirement quicker, faster.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, another question. Hey guys, Grant, how does the GDC come up with the game ideas, field designs, and how do you come up with the hero bot designs? Thanks a lot and have a great rest of your season. If he would have said, Dan, how does it do it? I was going to spill all the beans, but since they asked you, I'm sure you'll give a much more conservative answer.
Well, first off, thank you, Braden, and have a great rest of your season as well. First off, it's a 2-year long process. So right now we have this year's games, over, under, and full volume. We are finalizing the rules for the games that will be coming out this April. And we've started the design process for the games that will be coming out the year after that. So it's a really long process. It generally starts with an overall dynamic or overall concept. So by that, I don't necessarily mean a specific field element or a specific game object. A good example is like Turning Point from a couple of years ago. The core dynamic of that was change everything from one color to the other color, right? How do we do that? What are different ways that robots can change something from one color to another color? So anyways, it starts with that core concept. And then from there, it's pretty similar to the engineering design process that a lot of you all would be doing with your robots, where we kind of look at what are our constraints, obviously the field size, the cost, the budget for the field that we sell, the physical limitations of the robots. We can't have a game that requires flying robots or what have you. And then we ask ourselves a bunch of questions, right? How many discs are they shooting at once? How big are the discs? Why are they shooting the discs? Are there other things they're doing other than shooting the discs? And we go through each one of those questions and try to evaluate an answer that best satisfies the various constraints and experiences that we're trying to create. That's a very, very high level explanation that I would love to give more about. But, the REC just won't give me an hour-long webinar to talk about it. And then the question at the end, or the other question you asked that I don't think I've talked about before, is the hero bot. Before the hero bot, one of our constraints that we would always place on ourselves for the competition is that the worst design robot driven by the worst driver has to be able to score a point. And so that's where you get a lot of floor goals or parking bonuses or things like that, where there still has to be something for that absolute bottom 10%, introductory team to be able to accomplish. With the introduction of the hero bot, we were able to adjust that constraint now so that it's more like the hero bot driven by the worst driver should still be able to contribute points to an alliance. And we're able to, as we're designing the game, we have tasks that all right, this is what we think the 1%ers will do. This is what we think the 80%ers will do. This is what we think the hero bot needs to be able to do.
Yeah, I think, Grant, under your leadership of the GDC, I love the games that you come up with. And I think the hero bot, that evolution of saying, okay, we're not going to limit ourselves just to a claw bot, but we want to add new game elements and we need to make some rules. And I think how you presented that was really, really important.
There's another thing. I'm going to interrupt you. you probably weren't going to say this, but the other reason is because the clawbot is actually illegal in like several games. And so we had to like fix that. So anyways.
But to the community out there, 30,000 teams. Not every team is trying to get to their regional, state, national championship. There are a lot of teams out there that build their robot and go to one, maybe two events, right? And we want to make sure that those teams have a great experience as well. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that. My staff will tell you about Dan's infamous bell curve, right? My job is to make sure that we are reaching all the students in the bell curve. And the HeroBot is one way that we do that. So for those students that join a team, they get a grant, they join a team, they do it for 4 hours a week. We want to make sure that when they go to an event, they still have a good experience of being able to score, right? So I think the GDC does a fantastic job of understanding the needs of all the teams in our program, not just the teams that are trying to get to VEX Worlds. So thank you, Grant.
We try. Thanks. Thank you, Dan, for saying that.
Hey, Dan and Grant, I was just wondering, what happens if your robot tips over in the match? Are you allowed to go in and pick it up, or are you stuck like that for the rest of the match? Thanks. This is 65292E, and my name's Horseshoe.
I'm sorry if someone tipped you over, Team 65292E. So this is an interesting question. It's not really a rules question. I'll comment on what rules would apply, but what I would really answer this question with is start by looking at what happened to lead to that, incident. Chances are there might be something about your design or your gameplay or your driving that obviously you don't want to say it was your fault, but maybe could have helped prevent it if you had a wider drive base or, drove slower around defense or something like that. Before even worrying about the rules, I would start there by reflecting on that. And the reason why I start there is because any of the rules that do refer to tipping, G13 being the main one, they all make sure to remind you that teams are responsible for the actions of their robot at all times, even during autonomous. And so the most obvious example of this is if your robot is driving around with a super small drive base and somebody tips you over, that probably won't result in a violation or a penalty because you did have some, not you specifically, but the team in question did have some responsibility or onus on them to design their robot such that it's not damaged or tipped by minor contact. So that's the philosophical answer. The rules answer is you would look at G13. The head ref would see that this incident occurred and then immediately try to determine whether the tip was intentional or egregious or if that team has tipped other robots in previous matches, and they would make a judgment call accordingly. Tipping is one of the most difficult calls to rule on, and I hesitate to say this too strongly, but I'll go ahead and say it. In my experience, the vast majority of tips in the VEX Robotics competition is not a G13 violation. The vast majority are incidental, rubbins racing, type of contact, especially in this year's game. This year's one of the faster games we've ever had. And so if your robot is 2 feet tall and you're trying to block somebody who's in front of their match load zone, you might get tipped over. That's totally on you. So that's one way to answer that question.
So Grant, you're saying it's not a strategy to design a very narrow, tall robot and hope to win by DQ every match?
And put your battery up top and with a really high center of gravity? Yeah, no. Actually, let me answer this question also in the context of VEX IQ. If your robot tips over in the VEX IQ robotics competition, there is a rule that allows you to retrieve it and reset it in one of the starting positions. There's some nuances and specifics about that. You have to remove any blocks that it's holding. You can't, change it, et cetera, et cetera. But we do try to have a little bit more allowance for the younger students where if you do get tipped or damaged or your arm falls off, your whole match isn't over right then. So that's one note I wanted to make as well.
All right, thanks, Grant. That was some really good information. The next question from Mark. He wants to know why we can only have 2 air reservoirs.
I don't know. Why can you only have one battery? Engineering is about constraints. You heard me explain it earlier when talking about the game design process itself. any engineering teacher or any engineering workbook or anything will will teach you to start by looking at your constraints. And so the rule book, the game manual for Vex, is essentially that. It's a list of constraints that you have to use to design your robot within. Some of the constraints are obvious for their reasons, like you can't have sharp edges spinning around, damaging things. Some of the constraints are really just there primarily to, limit some of your design process, narrow the scope a little bit so that you are having to work within some constraints. Most obvious one being you have to use Vex parts. And you are limited to one battery, and you're limited to 2 reservoirs and whatnot. As for the air question specifically, there was actually a team before this rule existed. I should have looked it up. I think it was in like the Roundup season. It was years ago, before this rule existed. There's a picture out there. Hopefully somebody can find it. There's a picture out there of a robot that literally, picture the legacy pneumatics tanks. I want to say they had maybe 12, 15 pneumatics tanks on their robot. And they were all used to store an almost infinite amount of air. And they basically had unlimited pneumatic actuations. That was ridiculous. Like, that's not really what we're trying to, like you can be creative and you explore various ways to solve problems, but some of them are just a little unnecessary. So had to put some limitation on that.
Yeah, Grant, thanks for the answer for that. Again, it's not an open platform, right? There are constraints in the engineering process. Engineers deal that with every day. When you're designing a car or a robot or an iPad, there are constraints. And it would be great if money was not an object and parts weren't an object, but then it wouldn't be the Vex Robotics competition. And honestly, that's a great segue for our next question. Nickel asks, why are 3D printed parts not allowed? So I know you have your perspective from the GDC. Clearly, we have a perspective from the REC Foundation as well. So Grant, why don't you go first, and then I'll jump in.
Yeah, sure. I don't know that our perspectives are really all that different, honestly, but it's a great question, Nickel. You win today's prize for asking the 3D printed parts question on this particular webinar. For those who've been watching a number of these webinars, we've answered this question a couple times, and the answer does shift slightly over time. Years ago, when 3D printers were a lot less commonplace than they are now, that rule was very easy to put in place. Hey, 3D printers cost $1,000 and require like an industry professional in order to use them. We don't want Vex teams having to worry about that, right? And so that was why the rule originally was put in place. Nowadays, that is no longer the case. You can pick up an Ender 3 for $200 and anybody can use it, and they're super accessible, which is awesome. However, during that period of time, you all have also gotten way better at designing robots than Vex teams used to be. And there is a lot more focus on like really niche, really in the weeds optimizations and really, teams are spending thousands and thousands of hours developing their robots. And there is a concern that if you do open up the platform and allow these types of 3D printed parts, the 1%er teams who are spending those thousands of hours, they will leave the rest of y'all in the dust, right? Because they will find whatever the 3D printed widget is that breaks that game, they'll figure it out, right? And then it'll become the case where you have to have a 3D printer in order to even be competitive. So that's kind of where that stands. Will it ever change? Maybe, but not super likely, but maybe. And that's kind of where things like VexU and VexAI have kind of opened up a lot more of the materials rules to relieve some of that pressure. There's also basically unlimited usage for like CNC routed plastic, which is allowed. And I've seen some super unique and super creative things that teams have done with that. So if you're looking for parts or to a creative outlet besides what is in the Vex system, look at that plastic rule, look at VexAI, look at some of the online challenges. I think there's still the online challenges for developing your own Vex part and whatnot. Like, there are a lot of other awesome uses for 3D printers. I love them. I have several. We use them every day here at Vex. But it's just not part of the closed platform experience that we're trying to create with the Vex competition.
Yeah, and I would add a little bit to that. So everybody says all schools have 3D printers, and who am I to dispute that? But not all teams have access to those 3D printers. So just because a school has it doesn't mean that the teams have it. Again, the bell curve, right? So there are a lot of coaches, matter of fact, the majority of the coaches, when we surveyed them, said please do not add 3D printing because they honestly don't have the time to really implement 3D printing into their program, right? So time is also a resource, just like materials are. And so programs that meet twice a week won't be able to implement that. And teams that have a lot of resources, different type of mentors will be at a huge advantage with that option. There's a safety factor too. If we start allowing 3D printed parts and they're load-bearing parts, and we don't know that the materials that they use to print the 3D part, it could lead to a safety constraint. And as you said, the VEX AI robotics competition does allow 3D printed parts. I think that's an option for some of these teams that really want to experiment that. And also, you can still do 3D printing. There's nothing in our program that says you can't do 3D printing as part of the VEX robotics competition. You just can't 3D print robotics parts, but you can 3D print other things as well, right? So if it's really important for you to be designing in 3D printing, there's a lot of people that give advice on the Facebook forums or the VEX forums of things that they've 3D printed as part of their program. And then finally, I'll summarize this thing. Last December, I had a chance to meet with about 30 students. And I just did a hypothetical. I said, suppose we break up the VEX VRC high school into 3D printed and non-3D printed. I said, so it's two separate competitions. And overwhelmingly, the students didn't like that idea, right? So they wanted to have 3D printed parts, but they didn't want to fundamentally change the program. But I'm telling you, by having 3D printed parts, it would fundamentally change the program. So we're never gonna say never, but again, how our program has been designed from the beginning is to have as level field as possible. And by using the great VEX Robotics kit of parts, and some of the other tweaks we made over the years, that really levels the playing field. And if you really want to get into 3D printed parts and you're not university age, please consider joining the VEX AI robotics competition. All right, well, I think we answered that for this year. I'm sure we'll be asked again next year. So,
but thank you for asking.
Yeah, it's good. I'm glad actually we had a chance to share our philosophy. It's hard to like communicate by typing a response on the VEX forum. It's not something we ignore. I mean, we have open dialogues. And again, to the point where we did do surveys last season and got real feedback. So the next question is from Brody. He said, hey, this season there have been many amazing developments in the VEX community and tons of breakthroughs. So my question for you this season is, what do you think the new meta will be this year?
That's a good question.
Yeah,
thanks, Brody.
Yeah.
I'm going to assume you're talking about VRC. Although I'll give a short IQ answer at the end. Actually, I'll give the IQ answer up front. So with full volume in the VEX IQ competition, I really think the meta is going to be teams and alliances that are able to work together effectively. Like, I don't care what the robot design is, if you don't have two robots who can accomplish all the tasks, working together. The field is too spread out, everything is too far apart, the robots don't move fast enough. You will need to have good teamwork, especially if you want to get that end game, both robots in the supply zone. Like, that teamwork's going to be key. So I guess the meta is going to be whatever designs best suit that. And I don't think we've seen one yet. I think any of the designs we've seen so far, I think there's a lot of room to grow in that game, which is exciting. So for over-under, for the VRC teams out there, I also don't think we've seen it yet. This game is one of the more, I said it earlier, it's one of the more exciting games we've had. I think the meta is going to be, honestly, there's some hidden metas that, like, typically it's like, oh, double reverse 4-bar, or oh, like solo auton win point, or whatever. I think this year's game rewards fast decision making and driver skill a lot more than some of the previous games. I think it rewards, on the fly, being able to watch the whole field and adapt and honestly just drive fast without hitting things and, messing up. So probably like a lot of good actually using your third drive team member as a coach and communicating that way. I think there have been some cool designs. I really like robots that are super short that go under the goal. I don't think we expected that, I'll be honest. So the way that some teams are descoring is they just have like a 3-inch tall robot that blows through the goal. I think that's hilarious. I hope the meta becomes super high climbs. That is one thing we really haven't seen yet this season. Frankly, because you haven't necessarily needed it in order to win an event. I totally get that. But I think that you will start seeing as the season goes on, as the level of play during driver control kind of evens out between alliances, that race to see who's going to get the one extra tier above the other is going to really start becoming a factor. So, I think we haven't seen what that design is yet. So that's my short, not so short answer.
For the VRC game this year, Grant, I think scouting is always important, but I think it's extremely important this year because there's teamwork is so important to this game. I think you'll see a lot of top seeds that will be selecting teams that are maybe much further down in the ranking because their scouting did a good job and found a complementary robot. And I think the GDC has really introduced that element this year, and I'm excited to see how that plays out as well.
Totally. Yeah, me too. And for some reason while he was talking, that reminded me of another thing that I think might be part of the meta. Super unique match load mechanics. There have been those are the videos that get shared in the GDC Slack the most. If we see a match out there that has a robot that's doing something other than just catapulting the match logs across the field. I won't give away anything because I want teams to figure it out on their own, but there are some really cool things you can do. And I think teams who find a unique way to utilize the match load rules and maybe have mechanisms that match load but also defend and also do other things, maybe also climb, I think that's going to be a key part of the meta later on as well.
Yeah. And that was the last question. Now, you may be wondering, all these questions were related to VEX, and if you do ask an aerial drone competition question, we would answer that as well, right? So, but today's questions were primarily VEX. And remember, we also have the factory automation competition as well. So the REC Foundation wants to answer any of the questions. Again, at the REC Foundation, you have your team engagement manager and your event engagement manager. The team engagement manager is primarily trying to help out the coaches and support them. The event engagement manager primarily is trying to help out the event partners and the events, right? So, but when you have questions about the program, VEX program, please reach out to them. If you have questions about the aerial drone competition, please reach out to the regional support managers for that organization. It's another great season, probably my favorite season in a long time. But we could not do this without the community. So especially our volunteers. So to the volunteers, thank you so much. You give up so much of your time to support our programs. I've met so many volunteers at events and at VEX Worlds, and I love your passion. I appreciate everything you do. Like the REC Foundation, like VEX Robotics, you see a future where we need these students to innovate, take risks, overcome failures and persevere. So thank you for your support. Another huge shout out to our sponsors. We talked about earlier about the costs of running the VEX Robotics competition and the aerial drone competition, and it takes money, right? So this year we have more partners than ever that are contributing money. But again, thank you to Northrop Grumman Foundation, our presenting sponsor. They've been supporting the REC Foundation for a decade now, and without their support, the cost would be a lot harder. So thank you to all of our sponsors, and especially Northrop Grumman Foundation. And finally, thank you to my staff, the REC Foundation staff, and thank you to the VEX Robotics team that put these programs together. And thank you to our partners in the aerial drones competition as well. So we're giving students an opportunity to do these competitions, whether it's designing robots, flying drones, or doing online challenges. And we're super excited to see you at events this year. Well, Grant, I think that's about it. So again, I appreciate everybody's time this evening. This is Dan Mance. And
I'm Grant Cox.
And we'll see you at an event very soon. Have a great season.
That does it for this season update.
Thank you all so much for joining us and submitting your questions. Good luck with the rest of the season, and we hope to see you at Worlds next spring.